Hello everyone. Like a lot of people, I've been patiently waiting for James S.A. next book, The Mercy of the Gods. Just so you don't think I'm crazy, this video was recorded about 2 weeks before it came out, meaning The Mercy of Gods did end up releasing during its production. Also, I had planned to include one of my friends' rankings alongside mine, but that got delayed, so I've included that list at the end if you're interested. Alright, back to the video. For those who are unfamiliar, James S.A. is the author duo behind the hit interplanetary space sci-fi series, The Expanse. With this new book just around the corner, I thought it was maybe a good time to head back and see how my thoughts and feelings about the Expanse entries stack up against one another. I love this series from the bottom of my heart, and although you'll see me criticize aspects of a lot of these books, I want you to know that I, on the overall, like every single one of them. It's just a matter of how much. Also, as a note, I'm only going to be talking about the main 9 books. I might make a video about the short stories and novellas one day in the future, but they won't be discussed here. Finally, there's also probably going to be some spoilers. I won't go out of my way to spoil major events, but I will mention characters and allude vaguely, so if you're really sensitive to the information, this is your warning. I think I'm going to stand out here by saying that Caliban's War is my least favorite entry in this series. And I do have to admit, a lot of that has to do with the fact that, frankly, I don't remember most of it. Now, that may be a testament to its quality. I'm not going to make that call here. But it is the one that is most suffering from me not having read it recently. For me, this book, even a lot more than book 1, suffers from being a setup book. The duo has gone on the record saying that Leviathan Wakes was a standalone with serious potential, and this book has to do a lot of that serious potential. Most obviously, this means introducing major characters like Ursula and Bobby and even Pax. It also has to prune a lot of the storylines that occurred in book 1. I think one of the major elements of this book is just shedding off an antagonist just so they won't carry over to the rest of the series. And I generally just don't love a lot of what happens in this book. It's a neat story, but when ranked against everything else, it does fall a bit short. The next, number 8, is Persepolis Rising. By the time I got to this book, I was fully hooked onto the series and ready to binge through the last 3 books. The setup of this book is intriguing. We're picking up our characters 30 years after the end of the last one and seeing the rise of this new fascist Laconian empire. I think it can be aptly described as a political thriller that sort of witnesses the takeover of the space station through the eyes of a few people. Of course, there's the usual Expanse craziness, but a lot of the story is grounded and close to these characters' hearts. For the positives, I did enjoy its take on a new empire with the Laconians, especially since we get an insider's point of view through Santiago Singh. He's someone born in the empire and thus fully believes in its ideology, although he's not always strong enough to take the immoral decision. It's really fascinating to watch his character growth and the degradation of his positive spirit throughout the events of the book. For the negatives, this book, as I said, does feature the series' biggest time jump. Although you can understand why it was needed, the impact that 30 whole years should have on everyone and everything isn't always fully explored. Also, Bobby is not really my favorite character here. From making weird groomer-esque jokes to a not-so-well-done character conflict, I had to really push through a lot of her scenes to get to the good stuff. Next up, number 7, is Abaddon's Gate. This book to me is the epitome of a stale first half and an insane back half with events that echo throughout the rest of the series. I have to admit, on a first attempt, I actually ended up dropping the book for 2 whole months. But on a second attempt, after I pushed through the first half again, everything after the Holden video completely hooked me. The co-protagonists of this book are also pretty good. Anna can provide a nice religious perspective and brings a good emotional heart. Clarissa's internal conflict and issues with her background are really interesting to read. And the villain Although he can be a bit cartoonish at times and it's not the best, he is passable and does his job decently enough. Overall, the book is pretty good when it's firing on all cylinders, but it does take a while to get to that point and suffers for it. At number 6, we have Nemesis Games, and this one was a shocker when I got to it. This is the first time in the series that we get POVs from all 4 members of the Rocinante crew. Actually, it's the first time we get a POV from any of them other than Holden. It expands our understanding of the crew and gives more meaning to those peeks behind the curtain we've gotten until now. The character that really gets to spread her wings here is Naomi. We get some really crazy stuff about her background, her connection to the main antagonist of this arc, and she serves as a strong emotional core for this book. The stuff that is happening on Earth is actually even more crazy, but the story itself isn't always great, but Amos always makes for a fun protagonist. Alex gets to engage in some fun space combat, and Holden gets to do a bit of espionage and politicking, which he's not always the best at, and leads to some really funny moments. In fact, this book actually has my favorite moment in this whole series. I'll put it up on the screen right now.
What'd you do?
There's a button, I pushed it.
Jesus Christ. That's really how you go through life, isn't it?
In terms of the plot, it's slightly disjointed given our characters are in different places, but it does kick off a war and political conflict that has been bubbling over for 5 books, so it's really great to see that truly unfold. Next up, number 5 is Cibola Burn. This is one book that I see being ranked pretty low in people's lists, and although it isn't too different, it also has the lowest Goodreads rating, and I just don't understand it. It's our first book post the gates opening, with 1,300 star systems now open to humanity. We follow a conflict that occurs on one of these planets as the Rocinante crew is sent in to resolve the matter peacefully. As you may guess, it goes quite wrong. We get a look at frontier life here. The types of people that are motivated enough to abandon their homes in search of newer horizons. There's questions overlapping legal jurisdictions that are bound to crop up if humanity ever goes to another planet, with a question of ownership between first-come corporations or the real people that occupy the place. The antagonist is an encapsulation of this seemingly lawless place, a person who thinks they are responsible for bringing society to order. He gets a great monologue at the climax that clashes well with Holden's character. There are also the new alien species who we explore from the eyes of Elvie, with really nice biological explanations and analogies. Overall, the book which is really up my alley, the setting is really great, the climax is bonkers, and it overall serves to introduce us to this new era of this world. Also, this book gets bonus points for bringing back one of the major elements from book 1 to resolve a plot point. I won't spoil it, but if you've read it, you know what I mean. Now we get to book 4, Babylon's Ashes. This book concludes one of the major arcs that's been building throughout the beginning of this series and comes to a head in Nemesis Games. The characters here are really well realized, with Naomi, Michio Pa, and Philip especially getting the spotlight. It also continues to build on the proto-molecule weirdness we've been seeing for 5 whole books and sets up the rest of the series with an ending that shakes up the world just like book 3 did. I don't have much to say about the book that won't just spoil the shit out of it, but I also really liked the exploration of all of the themes of the series we get here, about what it can mean to belong to a group, the tribalism that seems inherent to all human conflict, and the cycles of violence and revenge that we have the choice to end. It all meshes together to take this larger-than-life story and make it personal, rendering conflict through the eyes of those who suffer from it the most. So yeah, good book. At number 7, we have Leviathan Falls. Ending a long series is never easy. You set up so many elements, themes and story-wise, and so your ending has to resonate with at least most of them to make journeying through all of it worthwhile. Leviathan Falls for me fulfills all of that. There are some new POVs here, but we spend most of the book with characters we've gotten to know for a long time, There are these galactic level events, it wouldn't be the Expanse otherwise, but the overall tone of this story is kind of more somber than a lot of the books. It's a bold decision for the ending to this bombastic space opera, but one that absolutely pays off. Actually, when I had initially finished this book after spending a year and a half with this series, I actually didn't know how to feel about that ending. But the more time I spent away from the book, reflecting on all of the themes, the characters, and the final decisions, the more it started making sense as the only way this series could have and should have ended. They make a really bold decision at the end of this book, with a character making a strong decision, and I applaud them for having the guts to make that choice. The Coreys bring their A-game here, and I was very happy that they managed to end this series on such a high note. And now we have our runner-up. Number 2, Tiamat's Wrath. As the penultimate entry, this book had a lot riding on it, and fortunately, it delivers. It continues the fight against the Laconian while setting up the ultimate villain. It picks up the political thriller elements from Persepolis Rising, where we see how it is like to live under a totalitarian regime that has access to all of the networks, so our characters have to run, hide, and hopefully build up to a fight. Though I haven't had much for the last few books, I do have a critique for this one. There's a battle sequence near the end of the book that I felt really under-delivered in terms of its pace and promise, rushing through what should have been a longer sequence. It doesn't break the book for me, of course. The rest of it is just so strong, but it did leave me a bit unsatisfied. The book also makes the bold decision of not having Holden be one of our main POVs. It frees him up to employ some tactics that he's never used before, but it also cements the threat of this new empire and the direction that this series is leading in. It's all great. And for the final book, as you can guess by now, we return to where we started with Book 1, Leviathan Wakes. Yeah, I know I might be a bit alone in having this be my top book, but you can really never top Love at First Sight. My perception of books really depend on their novelty. What type of new ideas are they bringing to the table, and how does that mesh with what I wanted at that time? With Leviathan Wakes, the Coreys served me up a 10-course meal of childhood dreams with the pace of a jet engine. If you've been around the space sci-fi scene, you might recognize a lot of the ideas present here. You can recognize the DNA of someone like Walter John Williams or Heinlein or the countless other writers that inspired the story. But this was my first foray into a world like this, and that just made it all the more special. I've loved space since I was little, wondering how exactly we might get to live out our interplanetary dreams. Leviathan Wakes paints such a vivid and plausible future, I'd be shocked if we went down in any other way. Excepting all the alien stuff. Maybe. Alongside that, the book also has the pace of a racehorse. After a bit of a setup, we're thrown right in the middle of an interplanetary conflict that may rise into war, and I mean it when I say that the plot only escalates from there. It's a wonderful read, and the ending had me glued to the pages. Well, that's it for me in terms of my ranking. Let me know if you want to see that in-depth discussion for the short stories and novellas, and also the books themselves. Otherwise, stick around if you want to see more videos about books and movies and everything in between. Bye!